Well, it won't be long before snow and cold weather gives way to the sounds of spring. Those, of course, being the crack of the bat, the snap of the glove, and the cheering crowds. But before those days arrive, Major League players and coaches head to Florida, some to Arizona, for spring training. And that's where our guest this morning is joining us from. Corunna native Rob Thomson is entering his first full season as a Major League manager, having taken the reins of the Philadelphia Phillies back in June. Since then, he's had the interim title dropped from his title. He signed a 2-year contract to manage the team. And of course, there was that World Series appearance in October. Rob Thomson joins us this morning from the spring training facility in Clearwater, Florida of the Philadelphia Phillies. Rob, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Scotty. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Well, let me ask you first, how has the offseason been? I mean, that was a pretty busy fall for you. Have you had a chance to kind of decompress and get some rest, or has it been a pretty busy offseason?
Really busy and really different from what I'm used to because, usually we're, whether we get in the playoffs, go to the World Series, whatever it is, being the bench coach or third base coach, usually I go home and relax and rest and usually around the 1st of January we get going again. But this year was a little bit different. Of course, we went into November with the World Series, and then part of the managerial duties is to sort of recruit players and meet players, whether it be Zoom or travel to cities. So I saw all the 4 shortstops, all the 4 free agent shortstops out there, just to recruiting, get to know them, see if they fit in our clubhouse. And they're all really good, but the guy we got, Trey Turner, was the guy that I personally thought going into it that he would be the right fit, and we got him. So that was good. Also, there's a lot of community stuff that I have to do in Philadelphia representing the Phillies. So it was busy, but it was a lot of fun, and I'd gladly end my season in November every year if we could.
Well, you mentioned Trey Turner and those Zoom calls. Wonder if you could just kind of walk me through that process when you have those meetings. What are some of the things you're talking about? Like, are you kind of selling the player on the team and the organization, or is it more the player saying, is this the right place for me? How does that process work?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's probably a little bit of both. We just try and get to know each other. I want the player to understand what I'm all about and what our organization is about. Want to get to know them, what they're looking for. Want to get to know their wife and their children if they've got them, and then get them to ask some questions about the organization and about the city, about the fans, about living, about whatever's on their mind that's important to them, and just to make sure that it's a good fit for both of us. And the guys that we got this year, Dave Dombrowski, our team president, Sam Fold, our general manager, and his staff did a great job recruiting, getting the right guys, signing the right guys. And I really like our club. And I think if we stay healthy and do what we're supposed to do, then we'll end up where we think we're going to end up.
Let's go back to spring training of last year. Obviously, the expectations in Philly were pretty high back in spring training last year. So there were some new faces, some free agent signings of some big name hitters. You also had, a coaching staff that had, shall we say, been to the dance before. Joe Girardi, yourself, and Kevin Long, you guys had all been World Series champions back in 2009. So there were all the pieces in place, it seemed, for a really great season. It got off to a bit of a shaky start. You were 22 and 29. But that was there a sense in spring training that this was a club that could really do some damage? And did that then kind of make it surprising that the start was as shaky as it was?
Yeah, I think leaving spring training, we had a really good spring training. I thought we played well. We covered everything, and we got off to a bad start. We did, and expectations were high, and expectations are good. It probably means you're pretty good. And we got off to a little bit of a slow start. It looked like guys were kind of trying to find their way and trying to do too much at times. And then really we got into May, and May was just like the toughest part of our schedule. We played the Dodgers and the Padres and the Braves and the Mets and all these teams in May, and it was really the toughest month that we would have had to go through, and we struggled. And Dave decided to make the change, and you know, we just happened to go into the easiest part of our schedule in June, and we won 9 in a row right out of the 8 or 9 in a row right out of the gate, and I could see the guys' confidence come back, and then we just kind of rolled from there. We had some tough spots here and there, but came out of it, and really had a really good season.
Mm-hmm. Now, in spring training, I mean, the thought that, you know, partway through the season, there would be a change, and you would take on the manager's role. I assume that, I mean, that would have been the furthest thing from your mind.
Yeah.
You mentioned the difficulty of the schedule early going, but do you think there were, I mean, were there any other explanations, I suppose, for the slow start? Was it guys just kind of not hitting their stride early, or what do you think it was, apart from the difficulty of the schedule?
Yeah, I think that was it. We just, you know, we did get up to a slow start, and then guys started to put a little bit too much pressure on themselves. I think they tried to do too much, and because we have a room full of guys that really care and they want to win. They knew the expectations. They knew of not only Philadelphia, but you know, the entire league. Across the league, everybody thought that we were going to have a good club, and at the time we were underachieving. And then, you know, like I said, guys tried to do too much, and it just kind of snowballs. So once we got rolling, it was really good, and it was a lot of fun. And like I said, you know, 3 weeks ago, I told my wife, Michelle, I said, I've not been this excited to go to spring training in I don't know how many years. And she said, well, it's because you're the manager. And I said, no, it's not because I'm the manager. It's just because of the people that we have in the clubhouse, and not just the players, but our coaching staff. That's just a really fun group to be around. They're really talented. Our coaching staff is, in my opinion, the best in baseball. I don't make any decisions without talking to somebody and coming up with kind of a group decision. So it's just a lot of fun, and I love being around these guys. I really do.
So you mentioned the 8-game winning streak after, you know, that June 3rd day when the club announced that Joe Girardi was being let go and you were going to be stepping into an interim manager role. I've heard in several interviews you've been asked a question about, you know, what was the turnaround, or what caused the turnaround. And, you know, there's always the narrative that, you know, a new manager, teams respond to a new manager and that sort of thing. But one thing I've noticed is you have been, in just about every interview in which you've been asked this question, you have been so reluctant to take any credit, always giving the credit to the players and the other coaches and the organization. That tells me that there's a real, you know, sense of humility that you have. And I'm wondering how important that is when it comes to, you know, players responding to their manager and respecting their manager. Do they see that and say, you know, here's a guy who is not interested in taking credit. He wants to make sure all the credit goes to us. How important is that, do you think, in establishing that relationship with the players?
Yeah, I think in any type of leadership role, I think it's important that you are humble and you give credit and you take blame. You know, when I do my post-game interviews, if something, I try to all the time, when something goes right, I'm always saying we. And if something goes wrong, I tend to say I. And that's how I do it. I'm willing to shoulder the blame, and I'm willing to disperse the good things on other people, and I just think that's good leadership, and that's what I've been always taught and always viewed, and that's just the way I view life, I guess.
So where does that come from, do you think?
I think partly from my early years with my father taught me that you know, you got to take, if you're in a leadership role, you take the blame, and you be accountable for your actions, and when good things happen, you give the credit to somebody else. That's just the way it is. And then throughout my baseball career, it seemed like the best managers that I've watched and or worked for, that's how they tended to be. And so, you know, I sort of my whole life has sort of been that way. So that's just kind of who I am.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you think back to, you know, your days as a player in the minor leagues and, you know, in those kind of small towns and, you know, riding the buses and then you know, your playing career ends, you move into coaching. Did you ever think, you know, in your wildest dreams that you would end up where you are?
Not really. I mean, I think any person in baseball, any young person in baseball dreams about it. They dream about playing in the big leagues. And then once you get to the coaching side, you dream about coaching in the big leagues and managing in the big leagues. But in reality, you know, it's so far fetched and so rare that this happens. There's only 30 of these jobs in baseball. And so it's very rare. And you've got to have a little bit of luck along the way. You got to work extremely hard and listen and be in the right spot at the right time. At times and you know, just have a little luck and that's sort of how my life has gone.
When it did finally happen for you, when they did, you know, make that change back in June, how was it in terms of how your life changed? What I mean by that is, you know, in the years that you were, you know, bench coach, third base coach, jobs in the organization at the organizational level and so on, you were obviously very well known throughout the game. People in baseball knew who you were, but to the general public, you did enjoy a certain level of anonymity.
Yeah.
No more. Obviously,
Yeah.
that's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
How has that changed for you, and how have you kind of dealt with that?
I think it has changed. I mean, it's hard to go, especially in Philadelphia, anywhere where, you know, somebody doesn't recognize me. In Stratford, the same thing, but I think Stratford's a little bit different. I've lived there for so long that I'm just part of the community, so it's not a big deal then. And I view it like I view the players or anybody else. I treat people the way I feel like I want to be treated. So they're fans, and I'm kind of the conduit between the team and the fans. So I treat people with respect and enjoy it as much as I can. And not that I don't want to sound cocky or overconfident, but I do enjoy it, and that's the way you got to be. And because they are our fans, and they pay a lot of money to watch us play.
So. The one thing I've always kind of wondered is you know, the casual fan, the average baseball fan sees major league players, major league coaches, teams, and it is, you know, such a lucrative profession for those who, you know, have great levels of success. I sometimes feel like the average fan looks at it and sees nothing but the glamour of it, I suppose. What do you think it is the average person maybe doesn't know about the daily life of someone in the big leagues during the season, in the off season? I guess what I mean is sort of the amount of work that goes into it. Do you think that the average fan really understands just how much work goes into to what they see when they turn on the TV to watch the game?
Yeah, I don't think they do, and I think it's impossible for them to understand unless they're in the clubhouse watching these guys on a daily basis. Our guys will show up for a 7 o'clock game at noon sometimes, or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's not like they sit in their locker and just wait for batting practice. They have a routine that they go through. Guys are in the training room, in the hot tubs, in the cold tubs, in the cages, watching film, in the weight room. They have a lot of things to do. And they spend a lot of time at it to hone their craft and be the best they can be, and they take a lot of pride in it. So I don't think, unless you're in the clubhouse, I don't think anybody could understand exactly how much time and effort these players and coaches put into their craft.
And in today's game, I mean, analytics are such a huge part of it. And you've talked before about trying to balance you know, the analytic approach along with the kind of the feel approach, if you will. And the one thing I thought was really interesting that you had said, that I'd heard you say was, analytics are great. They can tell us, what the tendencies are and everything, but it doesn't really take into account rather the human element.
Yeah.
I wondered if you could just sort of explain how you merge the two, and sort of what hesitation you might have when the analytics department comes to you and says, this guy should be not facing this pitcher, you should be pinch hitting for him or whatever. How do you handle, kind of those two approaches?
Yeah, I think it's always a case by case basis as far as dealing with the player and dealing with situations. You got to know the player. You got to know the mental side of his game and the emotional side of his game. And although the tendency or the numbers will tell you, for example, that we need to pinch hit this guy against this particular pitcher, it doesn't take into account how that's going to affect him tomorrow as far as his confidence is concerned. And is the gain that you're going to get by pinch hitting this guy, is it more than what you're going to lose by losing his confidence moving forward? So I think, and I'm not perfect, but I think that every one of those cases, I understand the analytics, I understand the tendencies, what we're supposed to do, but I'm always factoring in the mental and emotional side of it. And again, it's on a case by case basis. Some guys, I know that if you pinch hit for them or you take them a pitcher out of a game at any time, it's not really going to affect them. But I do know that there are certain guys that it's going to affect them in the coming days. And do you really want to risk that? That's the question, or that's the answer you got to come up with.
So we fast forward now from last year to this spring training. It's just getting underway. Obviously, with the success you had last year, the expectations are still there, maybe even more so this year going into spring training. You're defending National League champions, some new faces, a few players from the team from last year are now elsewhere. You brought in some new players. You mentioned Trey Turner, of course. So going into this year with the expectations being, as I said, probably even higher than they were last year, how do you manage that? And how do you, kind of keep the players grounded and make it such that the expectations aren't weighing on them too heavily?
Yeah, it's like I said, expectations are good because it probably means you're good. The pressure comes from if you've got high expectations, but you're not very good. That's pressure. What we're going through shouldn't be pressure because we are very good. We do have high expectations. Somebody asked me are you worried about complacency on this club? And I said, although you keep your finger on the pulse, I'm not, because yes, we won the National League, but we didn't win the World Series. And that's really our goal. And just watching these players, the way they've worked during the off season with all the reports, because a lot of people are following these guys, whether it be our strength and conditioning staff, our coaches, our trainers, to a man, they've worked extremely hard and they've stayed on their off-season plan. So they got a taste last year and they are hungry. And I think, and again, expectations are high. You get off to a slow start. You always have to keep in mind it's a long year, and not that you want to get off to a slow start, but you just have to be, even keeled about the whole thing and understand that it is a long year and we're really good. And as long as we stay healthy and do what we're supposed to do, we'll end up where we want to end up.
Now, your club, of course, is not the only one in the division that has brought in some high caliber new players. The division has gotten tougher.
Yep.
When you look at some of the additions that the other teams in the division have made, I think particularly of the Mets, how do you see the division shaping up this year? I mean, it seems like it's going to be a real dogfight amongst a couple of teams. There doesn't seem to be any real weakness in the division this year.
Yeah, Atlanta's better. They lost Dansby Swanson, but they get Soroka back. They've got some pitching that was not healthy last year. They'll get back. They've added a Gold Glove catcher. The Mets have added a number of guys. So, and then you look at Miami too. They've always had good pitching, and now they're starting to add some offense. But they got Gene Segura, and they got the former last year's American League batting champion that they've added. They still have the great pitching. So this division is a bear, and it's going to be about the team that executes best and stays healthy and plays as a team. And that's the one thing that we have. I can't speak for other teams, but I know that our players play for each other, and it's a great team. It's a talented team, but it's the mesh and the synergy on this team is just off the charts.
One last question for you, Rob, and I promise it's not about being the second most handsome manager in baseball, but but this baseball journey that you've been on for the last few decades is really, it's quite remarkable. It's you rode the buses in the minors, you worked your way up. It's been a long career, and here it is. You're going into your first full season as a major league manager, and I guess all of us, I suppose, are on a journey of some sort. And if we're lucky, we get to share that journey with somebody who is there with us for all the highs, there with us for all the lows. And for you, that's your wife, Michelle. You mentioned her earlier. How critical to your success and this career that you've had has Michelle been?
Probably, well, obviously the most important person in my life. When I first was offered, when I went from player to coach, the Tigers asked me if I wanted to coach, and I said, well, I just got married and I really need to talk to my wife about it. And so I talked to Michelle, and she said, I support anything you want to do the rest of your life, and that's what I'm here for. And she has done that for 38 years. Today is our 38th anniversary. And so for 38 years, she has supported me. She has been kind of, the only parent in the house at times. So she has had to be the mother and father to my two beautiful children who are now older. I don't want to tell you how old they are because I'll tell you how old I am, but she has been the rock behind everything that I've done, and I owe everything to her, and I can't say enough good about her.
Well, Rob, listen, thank you so much for this time this morning. It's been a interesting and fascinating chat, and happy anniversary to you and Michelle.
Thanks, Scotty. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Rob.
Thanks for having me.